Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining Dorsey Ross on this episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. In this episode, Dorsey interviews another special guest that will give you hope and inspire you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us on another episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. Today we have a special guest with us. His name is Russ Cambria. He and I met at the University of Valley Forge, and he is now in ministry at the Teen Challenge in Sand Hills Adult and Teen Challenge Center, where he is serving today, and he is also the CEO of that Teen Challenge. He started ministry after college working at Teen Challenge. A year into that first assignment, he was hired out west in Las Vegas as a program director. Shortly into that role, he became the main director because his boss quit. He was young and inexperienced and had no idea what he was doing, but God helped him. He then took a director's position in Buffalo, New York for 5 years, where he gained experience. He left Teen Challenge to work at the University of Valley Forge for 6 years and then planted a church back in Las Vegas until 2019. In 2019, he was hired by the Teen Challenge headquarters in Missouri and led their accreditation department, traveling 2 to 3 weeks per month at times to evaluate other centers. In 2021, the Lord opened the door for him to re-enter the field and became, as I said earlier, the new CEO of Sand Hills Adult and Teen Challenge Center. Russ, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Well, Dorsey, I want to thank you for having me. This is truly an honor, and it's been a few years since our days at Valley Forge, so it's just very exciting to see what you're doing now and what you're up to. So thanks, Dorsey.
Yeah, no problem. We won't tell the audience how long it's been since we've been at the University of Valley Forge.
That's right.
So share with us your story.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for letting me do this. And, maybe my story can help someone else out there who's listening that might have a similar background. And really my story begins as a young man. I did not grow up in church the way that I go today. I grew up in the Catholic Church. I went to Catholic school for a couple years. We weren't a very devout Catholic family, but we were in it enough that I knew the traditions. I knew what was expected. I knew the stories, the Catholic version of the different Bible stories, but, certainly did not have a personal, relationship or encounter with Jesus Christ for most of my life. And I was introduced in my teen years to a Baptist church, and I started going there. And that was really the first time I saw a different, I didn't know that there was anything outside of the Catholic Church. I didn't know there was a different style. Like everything to me, I thought was Catholic. So when I would go to the Baptist church, I would see it was a little bit different. They had different instruments. It was still very conservative. I would go there on and off for a couple of years. But really what changed my life was when I was 18 or 19 years old. I actually lived across the street from a really large Assemblies of God church. They built it in a field in Reading, Pennsylvania. And, that area grew up and that area just started to get populated, and the church bought this piece of land and they built a very large church. And there was a girl, of course, and all these stories start this way. There was a girl and I was interested in said girl. And we ended up being in the same class at Penn State together back in those days. We worked at the same mall. I actually was a volunteer firefighter with a fire department that was right across the street from her house. Now, I didn't plan any of this. I know it sounds a little stalkerish, but that's not how it was. It was just, all these little coincidences. Well, then her father ended up being the chaplain for the fire department. So I got to talking with her and hanging out with Jen. And Eventually, she invited me to go to her church. And then I found out it was that big church that they just built, like right across the street from where I was living. So I decided I was going to go. It kind of freaked me out a little bit because it was just so large, and I didn't know what to expect. And when I went in, there were drums and guitars and bass, and I mean, I had no idea. I've never in my life seen anything like that at a church. So I would go on and off really just to hang out with her. I wasn't really listening to anything that was going on, except what happened was there was an evangelist that visited the church for several days in a row. And we would go to these services, and you guys may know him, Greg Hubbard, just a really great speaker. And I remember sitting there as an 18 or 19-year-old kid, and he did a message on the cross. And it was all the stories that I had ever grown up with. Only this time, I felt like he was looking directly at me for an hour when he spoke. And he was telling the story in a way that almost like I needed to choose. Am I going to believe this? It was different. I don't know how to explain it. So I didn't know what an altar call was, or that we're supposed to go up and say a prayer. I didn't know any of that stuff. I'd never heard of that in my life. But that's what he did. He invited people up. If this message is for you and you'd like to accept Jesus as your personal savior, come up. And I did. I went up and I said the prayer. And again, as a Catholic, I just thought, okay, well, this is their version of some memorized prayer. I'm going to say it. Now I'll be double covered just in case they're right and the Catholics are wrong. All that went through my head. And so I just did it, and what happened afterward, just over the next several weeks and couple months, is I found myself like in that life transition. I didn't know what to do next. I was going to Penn State and wasn't able to go back there. I just wasn't a good student. I was terrible. I didn't want to go. I wasn't, motivated. Grades weren't good. So anyway, Jen, the girl I chased into church, decided she was going to go to Valley Forge Christian College, which is now UVF. And I said, well, I'll just go wherever you're going to go. And sure, I'll just go to school there. I said, do they have any degree that isn't like biblical? Like, do they have any secular degree? I said, I'll just do that major, whatever that might be. Well, that turned out to be elementary education. And I lasted about 3.5 weeks in that major. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to change to pastoral counseling because I could put the pastoral stuff aside and just focus on the counseling piece. I said, that'll be a great plan. I can go out and, learn behavioral science. And really then over the next 3.5 years, my plan was just to skate through, and really the Lord got a hold of my heart. Man, I was discipled at that school from the students in the dorms. I didn't have traditional training in how to be a Christian. I just learned from living with a bunch of guys in a dorm who were doing it. And, I tell the story that, to me, it was so awkward because like on a Tuesday, they would go find a place to pray. And like, who prays on a Tuesday? In my world growing up, that was a Sunday thing and you get 1 hour. So these guys were living that life all week. So to me, it was just very different. I thank God for those years. I didn't always appreciate the rules and things that they put on us because I just kind of rebelled against that stuff. But I had a cool guy on my floor named Roy. Roy was our RA, and Roy just, he kind of let me have my complaining moments. And then he would just look at me and say, I love you, Russ. And I was like, you're driving me nuts. Stop telling me that. And eventually I understood what he was talking about. So yeah, it's been interesting. So that's been my life story before entering ministry. Does that help?
Going back to the Greg Hartlick for a minute, I think, anybody that went to Valley Forge, for any number of years that doesn't know him, doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, he's a great evangelist. And I'll tell you, if you ever have Greg Hubbard to your church, you better have a lot of Gatorade because he sweats and he yells. But he gets into it. And I remember looking at him back in those days thinking, man, like whatever he's saying, he really believes it. Look at him. He's putting a lot of energy into it. And now I know, of course, he was pumped up and ready to preach the message that night. And I just thank God I went into that service. I really believe that was a turning point for me.
Yeah. Whether before, Valley Forge or even, now recently, when was there a time that you learned to trust God more deeply?
Yeah, I didn't. To say that I needed to trust the Lord in college, I don't think I knew that back then. But I can tell you, once I entered ministry, especially the ministry of Teen Challenge, and like you alluded to earlier in my introduction, like I found myself, almost overnight in a position where I went from being a support staff to being the main guy. And I mean, I remember there was a moment where I looked around and I saw employees and I was like, oh my goodness, like I'm in charge of these people. They're looking to me for direction. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I remember having to, okay, Lord, I do believe that you called me to this ministry. I have no idea how to direct anything. So tell me, how do I do this? What do I, how do I make sure that, Keith is experiencing, your presence in the position that he feels called to. And same with Brandon and these different guys that were on staff. So I think, really, maybe without warning, God just kind of threw me in and that's how I responded. I had to respond. I was either going to quit or I was going to learn how to trust the Lord. So I chose, well, I'm not going to quit. We're going to make sure that this gets done. But it was definitely some scary times.
Yeah. With, you not having a lot of, background, in, going into the University of Valley Forge, what was the first Bible verse that caught your attention?
Yeah, and I've known some Bible verses through my Catholic years, but right. I can tell you, 2 Corinthians 5:17 to this day is one of my favorites because the people I started hanging out with at Valley Forge were, and I didn't know this, but when I look at my circle of friends, all of them were Teen Challenge graduates that ended up at Valley Forge Christian College. So somehow I just kind of found my way to those type of individuals, and they all would talk about that verse because I found out later that that's kind of the verse of Teen Challenge. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things are new. That's their life story, their testimony. So I would agree with that. I didn't go the route of being a heroin addict, of being a crack addict or a meth addict. I've dabbled in alcohol. I drank when I was back at, Penn State, did things like that, did stupid stuff. But my life was never shattered by addiction. Yet I fit in with these guys who lost everything. And I really didn't see a difference. I thought I was just as lost as those guys were. I just had a different way of being lost. So when I would hear that verse, 2 Corinthians 5:17, I thought, well, that doesn't just apply to Teen Challenge people. That's me as well,
What is Teen Challenge? Maybe somebody listening, they're like,
sure.
What is Teen Challenge? What exactly is Teen Challenge?
Yeah, and the name's a little bit of a misnomer. It's we've in recent years, it's called Adult and Teen Challenge. So they've made it ATC, Adult and Teen Challenge, because for the most part, a lot of our programs deal with people 18 and up. We do have a few adolescent programs, but it is a Christian discipleship ministry for those that are struggling with life-controlling problems. So drugs, alcohol, different behaviors, whatever the case may be, they can enter into one of our programs. There's 221 of them across the nation. And basically they put themselves in treatment. It's addiction treatment with a discipleship focus. So we are faith-centered. Everything about what we do is glorifying God and making sure men and women know their rightful place in the kingdom of God and how they're supposed to live their life. And we believe that by discipling them and giving them a relationship with Jesus and cultivating that relationship, that the drug and the alcohol addiction becomes a thing of their past. So as they replace that stuff with a relationship with Christ, there is no more desire to go out and get high and to do some of those things. And we've got a success rate as of 2019, the latest study by Evangel University came out, and we have a 78% success rate. And that's incredible. I mean, in that space in the field, if you've got a 15% success rate, you're considered exceptional. So Teen Challenge, without all of those tools that other organizations use, it shows consistently to be about 75 to 78%. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is. That's awesome. It's that high for you guys. What made you get into Teen Challenge or into that ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a couple things. I did not know much about the program at all. Now, Jen, remember I was hanging out with her in college, and she's the reason I went to the school. Well, her father worked for Teen Challenge. So I'd heard the name because I just remember her saying, "Oh, my father worked for Teen Challenge." Well, then when I went to Valley Forge, I actually got to meet these guys. They were in my dorm. And I remember one guy in particular. He was a little African American guy, about 40 years old, really hyper. And I went up to him, and like he just tried to befriend me from the very beginning because Jen's dad used to be his counselor in the program. I didn't know that, but that's what I found out later. So of course, I was dating Jen. So he was like, "Oh, I'm going to get to know you." And it was great. His name was Greg. And I went up to him. I was a little rough around the edges. I said, "Man," I said, "you're like 40 years old." I said, "What are you doing in college? Like, hasn't that ship sailed?" That's how I used to, talk to people like Greg. And I learned my lesson. He looked at me and he goes, "You want to know what I'm doing here?" I said, "Yeah, yes, I do." And then he gave me his entire testimony. And his testimony was, he says, "I was homeless. I was on crack cocaine." He said, "I would rob you for my next rock," And he said, this group would come and minister on the corner that I hung out with in Brooklyn every week. And they were from Teen Challenge. And I said, "Oh, okay." And I remember I was like, "Wow, that's starting to all make sense, this ministry and this and that." And then he said, and I love this part of his story. He said, one week the van pulled up like normal. He goes, "I was expecting they were going to give me food, pray with me." He said, "But they opened the back door and they threw me in the van." And he said they took him to Brooklyn Teen Challenge. And I remember joking with him. I said, "Greg," I said, "Man, they kidnapped you." And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "At first I thought it was weird, but then he realized they loved me and they knew the only way I was going back there is if they come and get me." And it worked. I don't recommend doing that today to random people on the street. And that's not how Teen Challenge, tends to do things. But for this guy, it worked. And the times were a little different back then. But anyway, that's how I got involved with it. I heard his story. And then he invited me every week to go to Philadelphia Teen Challenge to volunteer. So I would tell him, "No, Greg, I'm really not interested. I don't really want to get into doing all this stuff with this ministry. I'm glad it worked for you, but I don't know if it's really for me." And he would knock consistently every Tuesday night on my door. So finally one day I said, "Greg, if I go tonight one time," I said, "would you please not ask me to go again? Can we make a deal?" And he's like, yeah, sure. No problem. So I went. I found myself in Germantown in Philadelphia. Those of you who know Philly, rough area. We went up to Teen Challenge and I went in, met the gentleman, and I went down into the little basement area where they had a classroom set up. And the coolest thing happened that night. I was looking to kill 2 hours. If I do these 2 hours, I won't hear from Greg again. He's going to stop asking me to come. So I surveyed the room and I found a middle-aged white guy that looked a little rough, like way in the back. So I walked over to that guy and I said, "Hey man," I said, "I think I'm here to help, maybe tutor." I said, "Do you need any help?" And he says, "Yeah, sure. Have a seat." So I'm looking at the guy and he's got like this crazy look in his face. I came to find out he was a heroin addict and he'd only been in the program for a few weeks. And he put his knuckles down on the table in front of me. His hands were out. And I'm sitting across from him, and I could see the letters tattooed on each knuckle. And when I read them, his knuckles spelled out "pure hell," like Purehell on all 8 of his knuckles that were sticking out. And I thought, well, this is where I'm going to die. This is great. I said, I'm going to be with this guy for 2 hours. And this guy's probably, maybe he's killed people. I don't know. And so he looks at me and he says, "Well, what do you want to talk about?" And I said, "Well, I'm supposed to help you go through your curriculum and tutor you. But I said, I don't really know that curriculum. I don't know that biblical stuff yet. I'm like a brand new college student." So he says, "Well, I'm just going to share with you my story." And for 2 hours, he told me every detail of his life. And by the end of that, the power of God and what he was saying and how God was changing his life. I'm looking at this guy with "pure hell" tattooed on his knuckles, crazy look in his eye. And this guy's telling me about Jesus. I'm the Bible college student and he's telling me about Christ. and the power of God to change lives. And I left there, and I remember driving back with Greg. We were on the Schuylkill Expressway, and I was just thinking to myself, if that's real, then man, I need to stop messing around. Like, I need to get right. You know what I mean? And from that moment forward, I just remember taking things a lot more serious than I was. It wasn't just about getting by. It was more about, man, maybe God really does have something for me. And I think I need to figure out what that might be.
Yeah. Well, I remember, I didn't know, what to expect when I came up and, spoke at your teen challenge when you were the leader in Buffalo.
Yep.
And I was like, man, what's going to happen? What do they think about me? And, I never experienced anything that they're going through. And,
Sure.
That one and other ones that I've spoken at, they just were inspired and encouraged by what, by me, and hopefully it helped them as well.
No, absolutely. And I remember when you came up, Dorsey, and I remember you and I had a conversation, about, what, because you had asked me what to expect. And I remember saying to you, I don't know if you remember the conversation, but I said, you know what, Dorsey, I said, these guys are going to understand your struggles and the things that you grew up with and the challenges that you had. They're going to understand it. Even though theirs was different, they're going to definitely understand part of your story when you start talking about, feeling shame and feeling like you didn't belong and all of that. All of it was relevant. And, before we started the podcast, you and I were talking, and I told you those guys, you were only with us a day or two. And by the time you were done doing whatever you came up there to do, they were like, hey, can you guys like put Dorsey on staff? Can you hire him? They didn't want you to leave, man. And to this day, and that was years ago. So I thank you for doing that for us back then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've done that, done other ones as well.
Yes. I think I saw that. Did you do Long Island with Willie Ramos? Were you?
I have. Yeah. I've done him a couple times. And
I saw that.
Even done try to do the one in Philly as well at some point.
Yep.
Or Williamsburg, one of the two, or both.
Yeah. Awesome.
What are some of the victories that you have seen over the years? And what I mean, to expand on that a little bit is, overcoming the addictions that they have been through, but also what have they done after that to go on into their lives?
Yeah, no, and there's so many, and I could go on and on, but I'll give you two examples for the sake of time. The current one I would give you is I work with men right now that are, on my team, and these guys are graduates, and they are some of the greatest coworkers I've ever had. They know what they're doing. They're committed to the mission. So I would say that that's a really huge part of the success that we see is that guys like, every guy that I work with right now who's on my team, even my executive leadership team, at one point in time, they were a student in the program, living in a dorm with other students, but they did what they needed to do. They got their lives right. And now they're helping me run the program and even expand the program. I mean, it's incredible. And then the other example, just, my best friend in the world, Jim Goins, I'm going to throw his name out there. Another Valley Forge graduate, came through the program years ago and ended up, getting his bachelor's degree in counseling psychology right there at Valley Forge. Then he goes on, again, this is a Teen Challenge graduate, goes on to Immaculata, earns his master's degree in licensed professional counseling, went on to work at some really posh looking, places. It was like some of his places look like Malibu, these addiction centers. But Jim and his family, Emily, his wife, who I worked with for Valley Forge, a dear friend, and their kids, they were part of our core team that came to Las Vegas in 2015. They just all quit their jobs and they moved to Las Vegas to help us plant a church. Again, this is a guy that used to be in the program, went through, did all what he was supposed to do, and now he's moving his family to Las Vegas with us to plant a church. And not only that, we had opened ministries and Emily had opened a food pantry that was like feeding hundreds and hundreds of families a month. So all of that, I look at it, man, and just like looking back, had Jim not been faithful in the simple thing of completing Teen Challenge, had he not done it, had he quit at any point in time, all of that following, all of that stuff following that moment may not have happened. I don't know if we would have planted a church. It wouldn't have been with Jim and his family. We wouldn't have probably opened the food pantry because that came from Jim's wife. That was her vision and dream. So, looking back, man, it's just all those little things of obedience that we do years ago. It just starts this chain reaction. And today, they're living in Georgia. Jim Goins is overseeing the entire Teen Challenge Southeast Corporation's clinical programming. So any Teen Challenge there that has, licensed counseling, Jim oversees the whole thing. He's starting them. So that's a huge success story. I know I tell his story all the time. If he's listening, he's probably laughing, thinking, man, here he goes telling my story. If I ever write a book, it's going to be the Jim Goins story. So I'm just really impressed with what God has done in his life. And Jim to me is just a reminder. There's other guys like Jim out there, and they could be in my program right now. So I just need to, continue doing what the Lord has called me to do. So guys like Jim get their opportunity, and then later the Lord will place them where they need to be.
Amen. Yeah, I think sometimes, maybe somebody will be listening to this later on, and maybe they are going through an addiction, and they're like, well, this is going to, hold me down for the rest of my life, and I'll never make anything of myself. And you just, gave two great examples that that's not the case.
Right.
You can make something of yourself with that addiction if you break those things, a bondage in your life with obviously with God's help.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the very thing that they're ashamed of, God can use, and that can become a major platform in which other people out there will even give them the time of day to listen to what they're going to say. There are places we go even now where, the crowd that gathers, they're not going to necessarily listen to me. But if I put one of my students up there and say, hey, man, go share your story. Well, all of a sudden, that audience is engaged. They're listening, because that guy is talking about stuff that maybe some of the people in the audience are struggling with. So, yeah, God definitely can use all the things that we're embarrassed about now. That really becomes a key to your future ministry. So, yeah, definitely. I would say instead of being ashamed of your story, learn how to tell it. Really learn how to tell your story. Get training on it if you have to, but learn how to tell it and have several versions of it. Have a 30-second version, a 2-minute version, a 5-minute version, and one if a pastor says, hey, I'm going to give you the whole time that I would be doing my sermon to come up and tell your story. So have, work on that. And I'm telling you, God will use all of those from the 30-second to the 20-minute version. You'll get your chance to tell your story.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
In North Carolina, what has God laid on your heart for the new season of leadership?
Yeah. Well, I'm new here. We just moved from Las Vegas in August. So we're here about 6 months now. And I really feel like the Lord is, so since I've come on, again, inherited a great ministry. So we had a former leadership here, Sal and Debbie DiBianca, did such a great job. So now I really feel like the Lord is helping us expand our territory. So he's given us a property near Fayetteville in Elizabethtown that we're going to be starting a brand new additional program in January. I believe we're going to launch that. And we've got a crisis office in Raleigh where we do all of our admissions. We've got a center right outside of Charlotte, but we're really looking for opportunities to go more in the city of Charlotte. Raleigh, Durham. It's just interesting. Like people call and they say, hey, would you come meet with this program? In Raleigh, Durham, they're an addiction program, but they might be interested in becoming a teen challenge. So we're going to go meet with them and really just see what the Lord has in store for us. It's not about expanding to certain cities and becoming bigger, but it's about what are we doing? There's a massive, massive drug problem out there, and opioid addiction is through the roof. I mean, like seriously, crazy numbers. So it's how can we help to get people off of heroin and painkillers and different things that they struggle with? So that's really been our prayers. Lord, lead. And, as you open doors, we're going to walk through them until he shuts the door.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
As we get ready to close here,
yes, sir.
Can you give me or give us just an encouraging word if somebody's listening and they're dealing with an addiction or they're feeling down and depressed, that they don't have, a future, they don't have, a quote, that they don't have, a future, they don't have something to do in their life because of their addiction. Can you just encourage those people?
Yeah. No, that's good, Dorsey. I think, the only thing I would encourage someone like that, if you're listening and you have an addiction issue, I would just say, listen, it's not going to go away. It's not going to get better. Really, no matter how much in control you think you are, it really is controlling you, and it's going to get worse. And the thing is, any listener dealing with this stuff, you've got to be able to step back and stop looking at yourself, but look around you. Look at how it's actually affecting people around your circle, your family, your wife, your sister, your brother, whoever. What has your addiction done to them? It's not just about us when we're addicted. It's about putting all these people through, really a living hell. They don't know whether or not you're going to die. They don't know if you're going to be arrested. They don't know what's going to happen to you, and it begins to affect and break down the family. So I would say, number one, don't give up. You're still breathing, so there's still opportunity. And number two, reach out. You've got to be able to reach out, and you can't just reach out to anyone. You're going to need to reach out to people who can help you. They care enough to maybe do some research and to make phone calls and to help you find help. It's not enough just to tell someone and then let them drop the ball. You really got to make sure that you're investing your time in multiple people that can help you. Does that make sense, Dorsey?
It does.
Yeah, but listen, as long as you have breath, the Lord can do miracles. We see it every single day in Teen Challenge, and He will direct your steps if you seek Him. That is a promise that you can stand on.
Amen. If someone's listening and they're down in Charlotte or they're down in Raleigh, North Carolina, or even down in Georgia where Jim Goins is, what is the easiest way for somebody to contact you and say, hey, I want to find out more about Teen Challenge and maybe even go into this program for help?
Yeah, well, there's a couple ways. So keep in mind, most teen challenges are independent of one another. So if there's 221 centers, there's going to be 221 phone numbers. But what you could do is go onto the national website, which is teenchallengeusa.org, and there's a center finder on that website. You type in your information, where you're at, what type of program you're looking for, and it will give you a list. If you are in North Carolina or even South Carolina, we deal with a lot of both states, and Sand Hills might be a place you want to come. The best way, even better than calling us, is going onto our website at Sand Hills ATC, Adult and Teen Challenge, sandhillsatc.org, and then hit the Get Help button. When you hit that button, you're going to get a form, and you're going to be able to fill that information out. It's going to give us just enough information about you that we're going to call you right back. You're going to submit the form. It goes to our admissions office. Someone's going to call you back, and they're going to know a little bit about you before you even speak to them in person. So our website, sandhillsatc.org, hit the Get Help button, and someone will get back to you very quickly.
Awesome. Well, Russ, thank you again for joining us on another episode of the Dorsey Ross Show. We greatly appreciate having you.
Oh, it was an honor, Dorsey. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, guys, thank you again for joining us on another episode of the Dorsey Ross Show. I hope this is an encouragement to you and to not to give up. And, if you have that addiction in your life, to break that addiction and, know that you can overcome that addiction in your life. And please share and like and, be encouraged by this today. Have a great day. And until next time, God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you again for joining Dorsey Ross on this episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. Please like, share, and tell others about the show. Also, please check out the other podcast episodes. And if you would like, donate to this podcast and buy Dorsey a coffee. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.